Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today I want to talk about a short story because it is Short Story Tuesday, a wonderful day to talk about the short form literature that exists in the world. So today I wanted to explore something by an iconic author, one who's primarily known for one piece of work, but who has an entire body of literature. It's about immortality and taking the wrong potions. I am referring to The Mortal Immortal by Mary Shelley. For those that don't know, and I find it hard that nobody would know who Mary Shelley is, but Mary Shelley is the author of Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, a lovely subtitle right there, which is, iconic. It's considered one of the premier pieces of literature of the last 200 or so years. But she also wrote a number of other things, including short stories and maybe a few novels here and there. Her mother was Mary Wollstonecraft, who was a noted one of the early feminists of her age. And then Mary Shelley ended up marrying Percy Shelley later in her life, and then unfortunately they had 4 kids, but 3 of them died before they reached 1 year old. And Percy Shelley ended up drowning. So, not the most, not the best of lives lived for Mary Shelley, unfortunately. But she did get a lot of literature out there. She was a radical thinker of her time as well, and that might show up in some of her literature. And she was known primarily for writing about goth themes and science gone amok and something about God in there somewhere too. And that shows up in the Mortal Immortal. So without further ado, let's talk about this wonderful short story. I'll do a little summary, a little analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Mortal Immortal focuses on a scholar named Winzy, an unusual name. He's reflecting on his long life, his unusually long life at this point, and he decides to tell us about the unusual circumstances that he is in. So, Winzy is a scholar, but he doesn't have a lot of money to his name, and he's in love with a woman of high class named Bertha. However, because he is poor, Bertha's mother does not take well to him, and so the relationship is forbidden. Although they still see each other away from the mother's eyes. In an effort to make some money, Winzy takes a job offer by an alchemist named Cornelius, but this job takes up a lot of his time, and Bertha becomes a little jealous that so much of his time is spent elsewhere. And in an effort to make him jealous, she starts seeing a potential suitor on the side, and this fills Winzy with rage and jealousy and sadness. And so one day in the lab, Cornelius is talking about how there's a cure for one of the potions is a cure for love, and Winzy just decides to take it, but he only takes half of it before it drops, and Cornelius gets mad, but he forgives it later. So Winzy takes it and finds that his love has been diminished, and it gives him a sense of confidence. But when he sees Bertha again, he's filled with more love than ever, and so it feels like this potion might not have actually worked. And so Bertha and Winzy abscond and decide to elope and do away with social norms. And so things are looking pretty good for them. However, over the years, Winzy discovers that he does not actually age. And Bertha does, and Winzy finds this to be quite unusual, but doesn't think much of it. On his deathbed, the alchemist Cornelius informs Winzy that the potion he took was a kind of cure for love. Wording there. And he informs him that the potion was actually that for immortality, and so Winzy is kind of doomed to live forever. And although he initially doubts Cornelius, because how could that be the case, but he comes to accept his words as true, as again, like 20 years have passed and he hasn't aged, and Bertha has, aged significantly. This creates some relationship trouble between Bertha and Winzy, as Winzy doesn't appear to be aging, and Bertha is jealous of the fact that all the young ladies in the village look at Winzy, and she also kind of wants some of that youth restored so that they could be on an equal level, instead of her looking like his mother and he having to take care of her in her old age. Still, despite the fact that he doesn't physically age that much, he still feels the spiritual and mental effects of aging. And he begins to suspect that although he will not die because he is immortal, he'll still feel the effects of aging. It's going to take its wear and tear on him. Eventually, Bertha dies, and Winzy finds that he is all alone. He lives a tortured existence where he doesn't have anyone beside him, no one to share his plight, as no one else is immortal. He fears death, even though he knows it will never truly come for him. There's always that dread of the future. He realizes he can't just kill himself and do suicide, because that's illegal, and it's also it goes against God's will. And he doesn't want to join the war effort and be a soldier in his time, because that's not who he is. So at the end of the story, he endeavors to go on an adventure, which hopefully will kill him and allow him to finally have the rest of death. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there's a little bit to talk about with this story. Mary Shelley touches on the theme of religion a lot with this story. Right at the beginning, Winzy mentions the Wandering Jew, which shows up in a bit of Gothic literature. The Wandering Jew was a person who made fun of Jesus, and so he was cursed to roam the earth for eternity. And that wasn't very fun. And so Winzy compares himself to the Wandering Jew initially when going about his life as an immortal. He compares it to making a deal with Satan, or engaging in the black arts. A lot of people suspected because he worked with Cornelius, he must have made a deal with the devil or something like that. And so you have the idea of a deal gone sour. There's also a mention of Faust, which is a story about a deal with the devil. There's also him mentioning that he's not a true child of Adam because he can't die. So again, indicating that it's God's will for someone to die. And I think that's what Mary Shelley's getting at with this story, that God's will is that you're born, you live, you die. That's the end of it. But Winzy is going against God's will in this story by living forever. There is no death for him. It's kind of like he's not even human, and that God fellow, if he exists, he's not going to be too pleased that Winzy is living forever. So a lot of references to God. And then at the very end of the story, there's a reference to Cain, who, after killing his brother Abel, was sentenced to walk the earth for all eternity, which is kind of what's happening with Winzy. He didn't kill Bertha or anything like that, but he is sentenced to walk the earth for all eternity unless he dies by gunshot or something like that. He's just going to keep on living, and that's going to be not so much fun for him. Writing this story, especially the relationship between Bertha and Winzy, she kind of paints a terrible, unhealthy relationship between the two of them. Although they love each other, their relationship is filled with jealousy, rage, and anger, and a lot of sadness, especially because initially Winzy wants to be with Bertha, but they can't be together because of class issues. But then when they're together in secret, Bertha develops a relationship on the side with someone who's actually paying attention to her, and this sends Winzy into a jealous rage, and he responds pretty extremely by drinking a potion that he doesn't actually know what it will do. He's just told it's a cure for love, but that could be death. Death is a cure for love, for example. So Winzy reacts very violently, and there's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you from this. Bertha waited for me in vain at the fountain. Her haughty spirit fired at this neglect, and when at last I stole out during a few minutes allotted to me for slumber, and hoped to be consoled by her, she received me with disdain, dismissed me in scorn, and vowed that any man should possess her hand rather than he who could not be in two places at once for her sake. She would be revenged, and truly she was. In my dingy retreat I heard that she had been hunting, attended by Albert Hoffer. Albert Hoffer was favored by her protectress, and the three passed in cavalcade before my smoky window. Methought that they mentioned my name. It was followed by a laugh of derision, as her dark eyes glanced contemptuously towards my abode. And that does not sound like a healthy relationship right there. One built by jealousy and anger, and not understanding that these two individuals have separate lives, and that Winzy, in order to be anywhere near her social class, like, needs to work and make money, and like, Bertha doesn't understand that, and Winzy doesn't understand that Bertha wants a committed relationship, I guess. And so this relationship, I don't think it's destined to last. I really like what Mary Shelley is writing. Like, it's beautiful writing on her part, but it's an unhealthy relationship. And I think Mary Shelley knows that to some extent. Or maybe she's just writing, based on what her relationship was about, which again is not very healthy. Another element of this story is the tortured existence of Winzy after Bertha dies. He's outlived all of his loved ones, and there's no one out there with a similar plight to him. No one else is immortal because the potion that he drank, like, he drank half of it, but then he accidentally dropped it, which caused the potion to spill out. So there's no one else on Earth with a potion for immortality, and that's got to bring a lot of anguish and pain to be the only one experiencing what you're going through, and also not to be around anyone you love. Like, sure, Winzy could probably get married again, but that person is going to die in another 50 years or so, maybe sooner, and that wouldn't be any fun. Like, Winzy is trapped in this state of loneliness, and also he's still aging. Like, he's aging mentally and spiritually. Like, maybe not so much physically, and he's going to live forever, but he's still feeling the effects of aging. Like, in his mind, he's 80 years old. Imagine what he's going to be like when he's 200 years old in his mind. The mind was not meant to live that long, and it's already, like, driving him to the point of madness when he's a couple centuries old, and it's not a pleasant feeling to go through that. But you would think that, like, he'd be welcoming death at this point, but he's still deeply afraid of death and what it could bring. He's kind of he's torn between wanting to die and also not ready to embrace death because of what comes after, possibly. And so there's another interesting quote that I would like to read to you. Sometimes I fancy age advancing upon me. One gray hair I have found. Fool, do I lament? Yes, the fear of age and death often creeps coldly into my heart. And the more I live, the more I dread death, even while I abhor life. Such an enigma is man, born to perish when he wars, as I do, against the established laws of his nature. And there's a lot of anguish going on inside him. That if you were living like this, it might drive you crazy. And it's a wonder how, like, 300 years, 200 years after he's drank the potion, he hasn't gone on a rampage or something like that and terrorized the various villages in the France where I think he's at in this story. The last thing I want to talk about is the parallels to Frankenstein in this story. This was written about 15 years after Frankenstein, and I see some similarities with the story. Specifically, science gone wrong. In Frankenstein, it's reanimating a dead body when you don't know the consequences of that. And in the Mortal Immortal, it's drinking a potion when you don't actually know what it entails, because the alchemist kind of lied to you when he was telling you what it was about. And those consequences are both Frankenstein and the Mortal Immortal, Winzy, in the story, is that he's doomed to roam the earth forever. And in both stories, there's kind of a gothic feel, like dread and a lot of religion and just this intense amount of darkness creeping into the story. And then lastly, there's the failed romance aspect of it, where in Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein's wife dies at the hand of the monster, and in the Mortal Immortal, Winzy's beloved Bertha dies of old age, and he's doomed to wander the earth alone forever. So I like how she uses similar themes in both stories. Mary Shelley is really unparalleled when it comes to writing this spooky goth atmosphere of everything. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on The Mortal Immortal by Mary Shelley, a wonderful short story, one that I think you should check out. I'm definitely going to recommend it. I will put a link to it in the description. It should be in the public domain. Otherwise, I'm wrong. I don't know, but it's almost 200 years old now, so public domain is always great. If you read this before, you want to comment on something I said, do so below. I would love to hear from you. Let's discuss the nature of immortality. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that people can find out about the other works of Mary Shelley. And in the meantime, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and immortal travels. Farewell.